thank you so much for being here. We are delighted to have you here. The Pushcart Prize, Best of the Small Presses, is edited and published by Bill Henderson, and it's a series that he has called a sample. So not an anthology, but quote, no anthology, not even one of this heft could possibly include more than a hint of the grandeur that has been featured in our little magazines and presses in recent decades, end quote. So for Bill Henderson's championing of the work of small presses, we are truly grateful and happy to be here to celebrate a sampling of this year's Pushcart Prize winning work. So thank you again for joining us. This evening, we will have readings from Brandon Taylor, writer studio teacher Nancy Connors, Elaine Hsioh Chou, Bennett Sims, Sally Wen Mao, Dorianne Laux, and Ellen Bass. We're thrilled to have them here to read their work, and we're glad that you can join us. Before we hear from our readers, though, I would like to introduce Philip Schultz. He is the Writer Studio founder and director. He's been teaching creative writing for almost 50 years. He founded the Writer Studio in 1987 after spending 4 years as the director of New York University's graduate creative writing program, which he also founded. Philip Schultz has published 7 poetry collections, including Failure, which won the 2008 Pulitzer Prize. He's also published The Wherewithal, a novel in verse, as well as 2 memoirs, My Dyslexia, and most recently, Comforts of the Abyss, The Art of Persona Writing. Please welcome Philip Schultz. Phil?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. And I won't even say, can you all hear me? Because you look like you can, at least the people I see. We've been doing this with the Pushcart Prize and Bill Henderson for quite a while now. This year in particular feels very special. And I was trying to understand during this last week or so why that is. And the work, again, is wonderful, is excellent. But it just feels, I've done my share of judging, and I know that the audience out there for inner voices has increased to a great extent, just as the writers themselves, and that it's become, in a sense, a symphony. Now, I remember first coming to New York in 1976, and I met Bill in 76 or 77, and I remember visiting his apartment at the Atrium building. And I remember seeing boxes of material going from the floor almost to the ceiling, and his telling me what he had in mind and what he wanted to do. And it seemed even then so overwhelming and such a large idea that I didn't know if I could understand. And I remember leaving his place and walking down Bleecker Street and thinking, well, this is someone who's brilliant and maybe even dangerous. An idea this large, who comes up with something on that scale? Well, here we are, all these years later. I believe my ability to read Roman numerals isn't very good, so I think it's 47 years later, and it's obvious what he's done. There's a symphony of inner voices unlike almost any other product, any other book that is represented here. There's no doubt why the American Academy of Arts and Letters gave him the 2020 Distinguished Service to the Arts citation, saying devoted to publishing literature that is deserving and non-commercial. And that was always Bill's ambition, to somehow deliver us. And this was long before, understand, there was an internet. And now what we have is this international congregation of writers telling their special stories. So Bill is the author of 6 memoirs. I could go on forever about him. He's also a dear friend, and I now am proud, and as proud as ever, to introduce Bill Henderson.
I'm glad to be back. 47 years, it occurred to me, is a long, long time. I'm astonished. And of course, I couldn't have ever done anything like this without Phil and all our writers and the Writers Studio, who every year has come forth and celebrated at the Strand or wherever, all over Manhattan and elsewhere. It gladdens my heart, as they say in the Bible or somewhere. And we have so many writers that help other writers, which is the whole idea here. We have about 200 staff, contributing editors who kick in ideas about their friends, or hopefully they're not their friends, but work that they think is marvelous from the previous year. 200 staff contributing editors, plus 800 presses or so that make suggestions. And all of this gets read, of course, by our guest editors. We have 6 this year, and they change every year. So we don't have any schools of thought that dominate the Pushcart Prize. It's always a mix. It's always unusual. I have never heard of most of the people that are in the Pushcart Prize are new to me. So I'm just a secretary for this thing. I try to keep it going. And so far, thanks to medical science, I'm still sitting around here and still have eyesight and a heart that beats. We keep going. So thanks to Brandon, Nancy, Elaine, Bennett, Sally, Dorianne, and Ellen for helping out this year. And I just want to, if I may, read a very brief passage from my introduction to the Pushcart Prize. I know I say it every year, but the wealth of talent, empathy, and insight here in the Pushcart is overwhelming. Year to year, the literary excellence of the small press world has grown profoundly. I can only barely express my admiration to our writers who, in the face of such enormous obstacles of climate catastrophe, war, deep international anxiety, they all cast aside gloom and persist, pilgrims on our sacred journey. Pushcart salutes all of you, and I salute all of you too for helping to celebrate this edition. Thank you. Back to Lucinda. Hello, Lucinda.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to introduce the first reader. That's what we're here for. So we're going to get right down to it. Our first reader this evening is Brandon Taylor. Brandon is the author of the novel Real Life, which was a finalist for the 2020 Booker Prize, the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Prize, and the 2021 Young Lions Fiction Award, and was named a New York Times Editor's Choice and a New York Times Notable Book. His collection, Filthy Animals, a national bestseller, won the 2022 Story Prize and was a finalist for the Dylan Thomas Prize. He is the 2022-2023 Mary Ellen von der Heyden Fellow, the Dorothy and Louise B. Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers. It is our pleasure to have Brandon Taylor joining us this afternoon. Brandon, you're on.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Am I audible? Can you guys hear me? Yes, perfect. Thrilled to be here. I've always been a little starstruck by the Pushcarts. One of the first readings I ever went to, someone read from their Pushcart winning story, and I was always like, what's this? Everyone seems to have one. I want one too. And so it's an honor to be included in the anthology and to be reading alongside so many writers I've gotten to read read and admire and know over the years. So I will be reading from my story, Colonial Conditions. I'm reading from the middle of the story, so it requires a little bit of setup. The story is about a young man named Carson who lives in Iowa City, and he has gone to one of those famous Iowa City gatherings of writers to celebrate a holiday, meaning both Halloween and the election. And he's just gone indoors from outside. It felt weirdly intimate to say that he was not leaving. Something in his stomach squirmed and beat. The sommelier nodded, and Carson's throat felt drier still. He didn't know what else to say, so he walked along the side yard and went up the concrete steps into the house. Music played quietly from the living room. There were people standing around the old-fashioned kitchen. It was all 70s chintz and cupboard doors hanging slightly off their hinges. He did not see Roma anywhere, nor the host. The sink was filled with ice and beers. On the counter, whiskey and gin and vodka, more ice in a metal basin. He considered his options. He could smell the smoke on his clothes and his hair. The people in the kitchen were murmuring about books, about movies, about things they would do after the election. Someone was... Someone was going on a trip back to Portland to see their family for the first time since they had transitioned or come out and begun to transition. One of the poets, tall and thin in a soft wool peacoat. Carson had seen her around downtown. Her eyes tracked to him across the room, and she smiled fleetingly. And then she smiled fleetingly, and then she took the elbow of the person she was talking to and maneuvered them down the hall. I know what my brother will say. Her voice trailed down back into the kitchen. Carson scooped some ice into a clear plastic cup and splashed some vodka over it. He pinched a sad brown lime from a dish on the counter and dropped it into the cup. Through the window, he could see the sommelier putting more wood onto the fire, squeezing lighter fluid, which made the fire rear back and kick high into the air. People on lawn chairs had taken out their phones to take a picture of it. The sommelier with the stick high above his head like he had killed something powerful and mighty. He shook the stick and posed and flexed for the pictures the people took, and Carson liked him a little better. The kitchen door squeaked open, and the host and Roma came into the house. They were laughing, swaying. "Oh shit, hey," the host said. He pulled Carson into a hug and clapped him on the back between the shoulders. Carson winced, but then he felt his chest swell with warmth and goodness. This, he thought, was what it meant to be a part of mankind. He felt woozy on good feeling, but it was, of course, only the insane rush of touching another person in so casual a way for the first time in months and months, as though they were impervious, invincible, as though the world outside that kitchen weren't on fire or riddled with disease and risk. But perhaps it was the case that the world was always burning and haunted with calamity and disaster. Perhaps it was one of America's greater illusions that those who lived in it had ever been safe. Roma stood by the archway to the kitchen, her hands clasped behind her back, shifting her weight from side to side. She wouldn't meet Carson's gaze. The host released him and patted Carson's cheek with his cold hands. "I'm glad you could make it, buddy." The host turned to look over his shoulder at Roma and then patted Carson's cheek again. "Thanks for bringing this one." "Sure, she brought me," he said. Roma pushed away from the wall and rolled her eyes. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here." The host put his arm around her waist and pulled her up close. They smiled at Carson, though the host's smile came first and then Roma's. Carson bit the lip of the plastic cup until it flexed in his teeth. The music in the living room changed from some classic guitar song that Carson could almost place to sad piano, which he could not. But the music, though loud, was so full of human feeling that it was hardly fair to call it the same thing as the banal guitar riffs that had given way to it. The piano sounded real. It sounded alive. "Oh, brother, what's that?" the host asked. He went through the archway. Roma squirmed. She was wearing a man's coat, much too big for her, over a cardigan she'd worn when she and Carson had walked over. "I did tell you it would be cold," he said. "Shut up." The music went back to classic rock, and Carson felt something in him deflate at the shift. "Well, we better get going," the host said. "It's your house." I'm in upstairs, he said with a smirk, and Roma's face darkened. Well, have a good time. God, Roma said. I'm not being given away on my wedding night. No, no, bet, Carson said. He tipped his cup to them. I wish you great happiness. This is killing my boner, Roma said. The host laughed, but then took Roma's hand and led her back into the hall and up the stairs. Carson watched them go. He wondered about the poet he knew who had gone down the hall earlier, if she and her friend were still talking about the first trip home. Sometimes it surprised Carson when people talked about going home for the holidays. He hadn't been home for a holiday since he had left 5 or 6 years ago. Time added up that way. By the time he had left, there was hardly any holiday worth celebrating. They had nothing but each other and their cold trailers and cars in need of gas or oil or repair, scrap they burned in barrels in the backyard so they could sell it for booze, for cigarettes, for dope. The last Thanksgiving he'd spent with his family sleeping on his parents' couch, he was 26 and kind of hard up. He was thinking about cutting out for North Carolina to give college another try. His grandmother had said she wouldn't be cooking the big meal. They'd have to fend for themselves, and Carson had woken up to find all of the ovens cold and empty. The fridges were humming and so white on the inside it seemed no food had ever touched them. He went across the street to his aunt's house and saw that she wasn't cooking either. No one was. That was the year of the food bank, of canned beans and meat that had purple tint to it. He'd drive his grandmother's Blazer out to the small church near the Citgo, and he'd walk down the long gravel driveway to the church kitchen where he had to stand outside and wait for the old ladies to look up his grandmother's name on the clipboard. Then he'd carry the 3 or 4 boxes of stale crackers and expired bread and lukewarm lunch meat up to the truck and drive home with it. He lived on snack cakes and cookies, the instant coffee, moldy tangerines. He had a job doing little odd things for his great-uncle's widow. She paid him in crumpled 20s and 10s with rips down the center. Sometimes the money had been taped together. The money was always warm when she pressed it into his palm. He had forgotten what it was like to have a family, to have a place to which he could return. When he lived in Madison and dated the writer who was in the graduate program there, her friends sometimes asked him if he had plans for the break, if he was going home, and he always felt bad for reminding them that he wasn't in school. He had no break. How could it be that people in graduate school still presumed that everyone had a place they could go back to? How could you go to graduate school with certain illusions still intact? How was it possible that people could still be so smart, so educated, and still so stupid? Thank you. Okay. Amazing. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce Nancy Connors. Nancy Connors is a poet and writer whose work has appeared in Stone Coast Review, Fail Better, Compressed, The Fair, and Burning Word, among others. She is the recipient of a 2023 Pushcart Prize for her poem To Cigarettes. She teaches in the tutorial program at the Writer Studio, where she is also a student in Philip Schultz's masterclass and lives in New York's Hudson Valley. Welcome, Nancy.
Brandon, thank you. That was just wonderful. By the way, I have to put in a plug for Brandon's Substack, which is called Sweater Weather. It's really thoughtful and surprising and a lot of fun. I'd also like to start by thanking the editors at Stone Coast Review for publishing my poem, and Bill Henderson and the Pushcart editors for choosing it for the anthology. Thanks also to Phil Schultz and the Writer's Studio for giving me a writing home. And many thanks to Francesca Moroni and Lucinda Holt for all the work that went into making this reading happen. To Cigarettes. I don't smoke, but not for lack of trying. In high school, I filched Terrytons from the kitchen table, bummed Luckies from a friend's brother till he went to Vietnam, palmed Trues at the bus stop, my younger sister hissing, "I'm gonna tell." I sucked Marlboros at the college dive, sipped tequila sunrises, and sent thick smoke signals to the lead guitarist, who missed the message, struggling as he was through purple haze. And in France, it was yellow gitane, red wine, and sex, sometimes all at once. Ah, France, Europe's 300-year experiment in corporal sin. France, where je ne fume pas means I'm not smoking right this minute, but I certainly will soon. Smokes, butts, ciggies, coffin nails, I tried every brand, held them languidly between my fingers while I spoke with wisdom on all manner of vital subjects, balanced them between my lips while I typed important works on my Olympia with the missing M key, used them as pointers, props, smoke screens, reasons to have a drink, ways to introduce myself, and justification for leaning seductively over a candle flame. They made my chest feel tight and my head whirl, and try as I might, I couldn't hook myself to them. They would not have me. I know now that I didn't have the look they wanted, neither suicide blonde nor black widow brunette. I was stuck with the sunny look of Doris Day, whose lips never met a cigarette, and who was in her chaste bed at 10 at the latest, dreaming of puppies. Now I drive past the high school and see the girls outside, dressed in black, elaborate black hair, black rimmed eyes, cigarettes in their blood-painted fingers, and the boys swirling around them, mystified by smoke. Religious education. When I was 8, my sisters and I got a package from our great aunt, a mother superior in Michigan. She'd sent us a nun doll with a long black dress, white wimple, and a rosary that lay heavy in my hand. Before you could say what's underneath, we'd undressed her. Answer, bloomers, cropped hair. How do you play with a nun doll? For a short time, she schooled the Barbies, but she was always mean, and we could never get the wimple right. Soon, we treated her with the same cruelty as our other dolls. She spent her days naked, flung face down in a corner. We were children then and knew nothing of grace or of the faith abiding in Kalamazoo. Wolves. We both dreamed about wolves last night. I yelled out in my sleep as the green-eyed creature crept closer, his eyes locked on mine. It's okay, you said. And from across the blanket, you took my hand and led me away from that dream and into another. This morning, you said that the wolf in your dream was motionless, waiting just outside our door, watching you, assessing me, you said, sizing me up. And we wondered if it was the same wolf, moving from dream to dream. Was there any wonder, really, that we both dreamed of wolves? Our bones ache. We move more slowly now. Yet there was an eerie comfort in knowing we'd both seen the moment before our end, and that we could talk about it while we sipped our coffee and waited for what and when we didn't know. There was some comfort that we could laugh, however uneasily, over the coincidence that wasn't a coincidence at all. And then we were silent, each already missing the other. The cats of Croton Point. My husband and I see them when we walk out in the big park not far from where we live, to the point of land that juts into the Hudson River. We always find them in the same spot, near the dumpster, basking beneath the handwritten sign warning, "Do not feed cats." Each time I see that sign, it brings out the grammarian in me. Don't feed all cats or just these? I consider creeping out to the park some night and chalking in the missing "the" on the sign. And I would do it, except that a Fisher cat has recently invaded the park and he prowls the night. Fisher cat, that most ferocious of weasels. Its name alone makes me feel its claws digging into my back, which makes me think of my father, who could turn on me without warning, someone to be feared, even when he's nothing but a memory now. One late afternoon, the November light already a deep gold, I count the cats, 3 tuxedos and 1 gray. One is missing. I peer into the scrappy bushes, even walk behind the dumpster, but no one is there. The missing cat is dead, I'm sure of it. I blame the Fisher cat, who can finish off a small mammal by biting into its neck until the bones crack. I rant to my husband. I want the Fisher cat to be the responsible party. I want him to be guilty. I am indignant and righteous on behalf of the domestic cats, but my husband reminds me that we rarely see all 5 of them together, and the 5th cat may simply want to be alone this afternoon. We keep walking deeper into the park, and he reminds me that we long ago decided that the 5 cats spend their nights quietly and safely in the machine shop. I can picture all 5 of them there, being petted by the men in gray uniforms, the same men we often see mowing the grass or blowing leaves. And now I see how they allow the cats to pat across their wide shoulders and reach their paws into the men's long beards, how they let the cats sit on their laps. And I remember how my father liked it when our cat would sit on his lap, and how patient he could be, and how he remained there, unmoving, while she napped. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our next reader, Elaine Hsioh Chou, a Taiwanese American writer from California. She's a 2017 Rona Jaffe Graduate Fellow at NYU and a 2021 NYFA Artist Fellow, and her Pushcart Award-winning short fiction appears or is forthcoming in Guernica, Tin House Online, Plowshares, LARB Quarterly Review, The Atlantic, and elsewhere. Her debut novel, Disorientation, received the Fred R. Brown Literary Award, and her multi-genre short story collection, Where Are You Really From?, is forthcoming from Penguin Press in 2024.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And that was so gorgeous. I'm just like soaking it all in. Thank you to Philip, Bill, Francesca, everyone here, all the incredible readers, and to Plowshares who nominated Skinfolk for this prize. So I'm actually going to read a new story, if that's okay. And I'll just give a quick little background about it. So it follows a father who's estranged from his daughter. They meet again 7 years later on the set of a movie set that she's directing and he is an extra on. Okay, it's called Background. Gene called them his good day, bad day bagels. When he was having a good day, he allowed himself a bagel. And when he was having a bad day, he'd also allow himself a bagel. How he landed on bagels was both a matter of convenience and health. New York had no shortage of them, and donuts upset his blood sugar. The bagels, on the other hand, they possessed an inoffensive, neutral quality. The problem was he sometimes swerved between good and bad so frequently that he ended up consuming 3 bagels before dinner, though Gene believed in waiting until the end of the day before declaring it one or the other, sticking a nice firm label beneath it. Waiting defeated the purpose of an immediate edible consequence. Gene measured out every moment of his life into a series of punishments and rewards. If he missed the subway right when the doors pinched shut, he let himself forego eye contact with the homeless woman jiggling her paper cup. If he skipped the subway fare because a charitable stranger had propped the door open, his punishment, awful, the considerate punishment he knew, amounted to giving her $1 along with the eye contact. Mentally taxing to approach life like a bank account, a nonstop escalator of fluctuating numbers, yet he found a comfort in it. A system of measurements to keep himself on the straight moral path because he couldn't always keep it straight in his mind. This was his self-prescribed treatment. Today, the day he took the N train from Astoria and boarded the bus on East 39th and 2nd, he tallied 0 ups and 2 downs, meaning he was allowed 2 ups. An everything bagel with green onion cream cheese. He counted them separately. He didn't like the cheapest system. At the bodega, he considered ordering a second bagel because today, surely today of all days, he would have reason to celebrate. He opened his brown paper bag as Napoleon sank into the seat beside him. My doctor said I have the heart of a 60-year-old, Napoleon said by way of hello. Given that Napoleon had turned 60 last month, Gene offered no response, instead politely listened as he denounced the toxicity of Western medicine. Napoleon interpreted Gene's silence as a reproach. What's with you? Nothing, Gene lied. My stomach hurts. Napoleon rummaged through his satchel, a fake Louis Vuitton, and produced a bottle of Po Chai pills. Take 2 of these with lukewarm, not cold water. Jean waved him away. I'm fine. Suit yourself. Napoleon zipped his satchel back up and eyed Jean's paper bag. What do you got there? Jean reluctantly admitted to the everything bagel as Napoleon closed his eyes. I haven't eaten since last night. We wrapped at 4 in the morning. I took a nap on the 6th. Didn't even have time to go home and shower. Jean handed the bagel over. You sure you don't want any? Napoleon said, already tearing through the wax paper. I'm sure. Jean meant to ask how bagels fit into Napoleon's anti-Western cleanse, but was distracted by a familiar face boarding the bus, a woman he'd once been paired with as a couple at a fancy Sichuan restaurant in the Lower East Side. He turned in his seat and recognized more faces before the vertigo of familiarity was heightened by a new realization. Everyone present had been selected because, from a blurred distance, they could be related. Napoleon noticed too. I bet you it's a Japanese World War II movie. They had met on the set of Law and Order. Napoleon, his parents had named him with misguided hopes, played illegal immigrant, while Jean played upscale lawyer. How their respective identities factored into this casting decision, Napoleon being a little more south to Jean's east, was understood but left unspoken by both men. Standing in line to get propped, Jean with his shiny briefcase, Napoleon with his soiled cardboard sign, Napoleon had offered to lift Jean up. This was his shortcut to making friends, lifting people up, including the 6'3" man who played security guard, somehow stunned and satisfied each time he managed it. Jean continued to run into Napoleon on set. Not unusual when few background actors share their narrow demographic. Without having exchanged numbers once, Jean suspected he was on more intimate terms with Napoleon's catalog of health problems than his full-time friends were. One of the perks or pits of the job, endless hours to kill when the only weapon around was small talk. But the transitory nature of these interactions was also their beauty, which freed you up to confess more than you'd otherwise dare, because after 12 consecutive hours together, you'd simply say, nice talking to you, and never see each other again. You walked off with others' confessions and they with yours, safe in the degrees of separation that stretched between you. Jean had been doing background for 2 years. When asked how he'd gotten into it, a stock question extras passed around between takes, he would say he'd always been interested in acting and wasn't a late start better than none. That wasn't entirely true, though. Actually, it wasn't true at all. He'd signed up to do background because of his daughter, Athena. Like Napoleon's parents, Jean had named her with hopes she'd achieve magnificence, and then, to his bewilderment, she did. Winner of the Nickel Fellowship in Screenwriting, nominated for Best Narrative Feature at South by Southwest, premiered at Sundance Film Festival. He once looked up her biography. Athena Wu is a writer and director, the daughter of immigrants. Her work interrogates the intersection of race, sex, and violence. She lives in Los Angeles. The daughter of immigrants? He read the line twice to make sure he hadn't hallucinated it. That she had taken on her mother's maiden name was bad enough, but what had compelled her to lie? Like Athena, Jean had been born in Michigan. They moved to New York when she was 5. He'd grown up in an industrial town on the outskirts of Detroit, pretty painlessly, all things considered. He had plenty to be grateful for, all things considered. But Athena, she refused to acknowledge that her accomplishments, all the awards and fellowships and titles, had been made possible through an unbroken line of others' suffering. And yet in her, quote, body of work, Athena never failed to adopt their suffering as her own. Such a thing as a surrogate of misery existed. That was his daughter. How to explain he was terrified of her, not just terrified, but puzzled he'd had any involvement in her upbringing, let alone her existence. In an interview, when asked why she'd gone into filmmaking, Athena had responded, I've always been interested in controlling my environment. I guess you could say it was an affect developed in childhood. The last line had made him squint sideways at his phone. Jean wasn't an ambitious man himself. He looked for meanings in the hours spent clocked out of his job more than in the job itself, which was at the moment driving part-time for Uber. He and his cousin split custody of a slate blue Toyota Camry. He had the weekends and his cousin the weekdays. He rented out the second floor of a duplex from a young couple, a painful reminder he had yet to achieve the kind of financial security his daughter enjoyed. He led a noiseless life, though it was a little lonely and monotonous, true. But doing background, he'd been a NASA scientist, a doctor, and a UN ambassador without having to train for any of it. For as long as he could remember, Jean had had trouble staying loyal to a single objective. When Athena was younger, he'd been a security desk attendant, a truck driver for a restaurant supplies company, and a maintenance crew member, just to name a few. In between jobs, he participated in paid surveys about products he could never afford and swallowed clinical trial pills his non-existent health insurance could never cover. He'd had no time to tend to a career. But Athena, she'd always known what she wanted, barely in second grade and already arranging her toys in elaborate 3-act stories. Other little girls wanted dolls or clothes. His daughter had coveted a Sony camcorder with infrared night vision. Other daughters were devoted to, or at least tolerant of their fathers. His had abandoned him when he needed her the most. Thank you so much, everyone. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Bennett Sims. Okay. Bennett Sims is the author of the novel A Questionable Shape, which received the Bard Fiction Prize and was a finalist for the Believer Book Award, and the collection White Dialogues. He is a recipient of the Missioner Copernicus Society Fellowship and the Joseph Brodsky Rome Prize at the American Academy in Rome. His fiction has appeared in A Public Space, Conjunctions, Electric Literature, Tin House, and Zoetrope All Story, as well as in the Pushcart Prize anthology. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Cool. Thank you, Elaine. That was great. And hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'll be reading from a short story that was originally published in the Kenyon Review. I'd like to thank Francesca, Lucinda, Bill, and Philip, and everyone at the Pushcart Prize and the Writer Studio for having me here tonight to read it, and for including it in the anthology and for everything they do. Thank you as well to Elliot Holt and everyone else at the Kenyon Review for publishing, editing, and nominating the story. And finally, thank you to nominators Ruth Whitman and Lily Henderson as well. The story is called Unknown. Unknown. At the mall, a woman asked to use his phone. "Excuse me," he heard from behind. He had just bought A's birthday gift, a new phone from the AT&T store. He was passing through the gauntlet of kiosks on his way to the mall's exit, and he assumed that one of the stall's sales clerks was calling out to him, inviting him to sample cologne. He ignored the voice and kept walking, but the voice followed after. "Excuse me, sir. Sir. Please, sir." When he turned, there was a small older woman holding up a heavy purse in both hands. She thanked him and made eye contact. Trapped, he waited for her to ask for money. "May I borrow your phone?" she asked instead. "I need to make a call. It's an emergency." He hesitated. If it was an emergency, why was she asking a stranger rather than a security guard or the clerk at the AT&T store? He felt certain it was a scam. But when he revolved the scenario in his mind, he couldn't make out what the nature of the scam would be. The worst she could do, it seemed, was take the phone and run, or fling it to the ground. "Please," she said, "it's important. I was supposed to call 5 minutes ago, and I'm already late." "It's an emergency," she repeated, and she gestured vaguely in the direction of the AT&T store, where a young boy and girl were peering through the shop window. Neither turned to look back, and it wasn't clear whether they were with her or whether the emergency concerned them. He considered lying, claiming that his battery had died, but something in her gaze seemed to anticipate the lie, and he felt this path blocked by guilt. "It's no trouble," he told her. He took out his phone and tapped the passcode into the lock screen. He swiped open his settings and disabled Bluetooth, then opened his email and logged out. He handed her the phone. "Oh, thank you, sir." She held it in one hand while she dug through her purse with the other. From the bottom of her bag, she withdrew a second phone, a newer model, the same model, in fact, that he had just bought for A, not at all an inexpensive phone, and began tapping at it deftly. He felt instant alarm. He still didn't understand the scam or where the danger might lie, but he did not like the sight of this woman's phone. "Wait," he told her. "Why don't you make the call on your own phone?" She was glancing from her screen to his, typing something. Without stopping or looking up, she answered, "I have no data. I need to find the number." All the politeness and gratitude had drained out of her voice. When she had finished typing, she smiled and stepped aside, holding his phone to her ear. He told himself to remain calm. There were hundreds of witnesses around them. It wasn't as if she could run away with his phone. And even if she did, what did it matter? It was only a phone. He could go back to the store and buy a new phone. While waiting for her friend or whoever to answer, she hunched over, hugging her purse to her chest, in the posture of someone cramped into a phone booth. He maintained enough space between them to respect her privacy, but he was still close enough to eavesdrop. And when at last she spoke, he pretended to scan the crowd while straining to listen. He could only pick out snatches. She was whispering angrily. "You'll never find me," he thought he heard her say. Never. Her tone, though low, was vehement. She continued in this vein, her voice rarely rising above a murmur. Whoever was on the other end of the line must have been listening in complete silence, for there were no pauses in her monologue. She seemed to be gloating. "I escaped," he thought he heard her say, or "it's too late." "You'll just have to find someone else," he thought he heard her say. Finally, she hung up and handed him his phone. "Thank you so much, sir," she said. "You are my savior. Thank you." She walked off in the direction of the food court. He turned to the shop window, but the children were no longer there. Perhaps they were waiting in the food court to meet her, or maybe they had already left with their real mother. He opened the phone to check the recent calls. There were none. The last number dialed was A's from earlier that day. Either the woman had deleted her call from the list, was this possible? Or she had not called anyone at all, had simply delivered her monologue to a dead phone. When he glanced back at the food court, the woman was gone. He couldn't find her anywhere in the crowd. Back home, while preparing her birthday dinner, he told A about the woman. He recited what he could remember of her monologue. When he'd finished, she asked who he thought the woman could have been talking to. "It sounds like a stalker," A said, "a jealous lover. Maybe she didn't want to call from her own phone because she was used to being tracked. Or maybe, he suggested, it was a debt collector or a probation officer. In any case," A said, "a happy story with a happy ending. She got away." After dinner, he gave A her presents, the phone and tickets to a play that weekend. They sat on the couch together, and she transferred the SIM card from her old phone to the new one. He helped her link the device to his Find My Phone program in case she ever lost it. And while she set up her other applications, he took out his own phone. The object seemed compromised in his hand. He couldn't rid himself of the suspicion that the woman had done something to it. It felt changed, charmed. He opened its browser and searched "Lending Strangers Your Phone." He skimmed an article and read the most alarming passages aloud to A. In one scam, he read, "A stranger will ask to use your phone and pretend to dial a number or text their friend. In reality, they'll be opening your payment applications and transferring funds to themselves." "You don't have any payment applications, do you?" she asked. He shook his head. "I won't install any either," she said. In another scam, he continued, "The stranger will call their own phone to harvest your number for identity theft. Sometimes they'll even call a criminal enterprise, a drug dealer, for instance, so that your number will be on file in their records. Later, they'll try to use this information to blackmail you." "Somehow, I don't think that's what she was doing," she said. "No," he agreed. It didn't sound like she was talking to a drug dealer. "Why not just take her at her word?" she asked. He nodded. But when he tried to imagine who the woman could have been talking to, no one came to mind. What had made A so certain it was a lover? He imagined himself on the other end of the line, listening quietly to that monologue. How he would never find her, how he would have to find someone else, how she had escaped. I'll stop there. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our next reader, Sally Wen Mao. She is the author of the forthcoming poetry collection, The Kingdom of Surfaces, from Grey Wolf Press in 2023, and the debut fiction collection, Nine Tales, from Penguin Books. She is also the author of two previous poetry collections, Oculus, Grey Wolf Press in 2019, a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and Mad Honey Symposium from Alice James Books in 2014. The recipient of two Pushcart Prizes and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, she was recently a Coleman Fellow at the New York Public Library and a Shearing Fellow at the Black Mountain Institute. Please join me in welcoming Sally Wen Mao.
Thank you so much, Bennett. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this Sunday night. Thank you to Bill. Thank you to Lucinda, Francesca, and the Writers Studio for having us here. Yeah, it's a special moment to just like see the Pushcart anthology. I remember the first time I ever like found one was when I was still an undergraduate at the library, and I remembered reading a poem from the anthology. I think that poem was a song by Bridget Pegan Kelly, and so it definitely like made a huge impression on me. Anyway, so my poem is called Loquats. In the spring, they ripen and swarm the trees, the waxy little fruits that resemble bald heads. I collect their remains, piebald, sweet and sour. A syrup made of loquats is said to cure cough. Their woolly twigs splinter in pear blight. I am bereft when I eat them all. My throat and heart always sore. Whenever I got sick, my mother used to skin yellow loquats, but they tasted better with the skin on. This season, my cough grows and grows. There is a tree or a fungus in my chest. I once kissed a man in the hollow, his tattoo of a stump on his chest. I counted the rings to 100. His memory broke against my cracked phone screen, like waves against the Sutro baths. In different years of my life, 2012 and 2017, two men with the same name fucked me. Futility was their name. Their bald heads, their kisses, the spittle of spite crawl into me, refusing to exit. At the herbal medicine store, the most expensive item is Tungsao, or warm grass, dead caterpillars whose brains become host to a fungus that rots them from the inside out. Good for the lungs, a panacea for all pain, the saleswoman pitches. I am warm grass, expensive but brain dead, comatose, and my love, my refuse. Futility fueled my every waking hour. The tree inside me is not loquat, but strangler fig. A tree so pretty and snake-like it renders you breathless, then worthless, all at once. And I'll read another poem from this forthcoming book. So Loquats is in the Kingdom of Surfaces, and I'll read a poem called Minted. So my last book included a lot of poems about the late actress Anna May Wong, and recently it was announced that she would be on the Quarter, and so many people sent me that article about how Anna May Wong was going to be on the Quarter. So this poem is called Minted. Anna May Wong is the first Asian American woman to appear on the US Quarter Dollar 2022. Oh, to be the face of money. 2022, newly minted, you are a new woman, the face of capital, the face of lucre. Preface, your nails tapping against in God we trust. But he is heads, you are tails. Toss a coin for the chance of it being you or George Washington. It's always George. George and his bloodhounds. George, father of a republic, patriarch of this nation you died in. In life, so many people thought it was okay to discard you. And they did. That director, his lewd smile, how he put his hand behind your ear. You were 16, 17. That was how you were assessed. A girl doll, forever foreign, stupid flower, spoiled with one touch. How you've grown used to being used once, expendable. You, me, commodities, fungible, fungo, funny, fun, fun. But for whom? No glory to girlhood or Hollywood, no glory to money or matrimony, nation or state, treasure, treasury, treachery. Tell us, fathers, have we come very far? Your father was a laundryman. Every day of his life, he encountered stains. A century later, I dragged my linens to the laundromat, trade dollars for coins with your face on them. Each new quarter dreams another cycle in this machine of cleanliness. But none of my dresses are in mint condition. Some stains I cherished. Some stains I wanted gone. For this coin, I watch my stains tumble, obedient to the laws of disappearance. Thank you. Yes, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dorianne Laux. Dorianne Laux' collection, Only as the Day is Long, New and Selected Poems, was a finalist for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. Her collection, The Book of Men, received the Patterson Prize. Facts About the Moon won the Oregon Book Award and was shortlisted for the Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize. Laux also authored Awake, What We Carry, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, Smoke, as well as a fine small press edition, The Book of Women. She co-authored the celebrated text, The Poet's Companion, A Guide to the Pleasures of Writing Poetry. Thank you.
Hello. You would think by now I would know how to get online, but that was a tough one. Okay, now to be online and also read my poem from the computer. Hello, I'd really like to thank everyone for being here, of course, but especially Bill Henderson, who's been doing this for so many years, and how we stayed with it, I don't know. Bill, I hope you noticed there's a pencil in this pushcart. Bill is a member of the, what's it called? The Pencil Club. And he believes in pencils. So this is my poem from the anthology, and it's called The Thermopylaeum. And it was an ancient snack stall that was uncovered in Pompeii. That's from the Daily Star, where I read the article and then later looked at what they had uncovered. Thermopylaeum. Even in 79 AD, people loved street food. All the young Romans flocking around the sizzling terracotta pots, the stalls frescoed with chickens and hanging ducks, hot drinks served in ceramic two-handled pateras, filled with warm wine and spices. Their sandaled feet glimmered as they milled around, waving hellos, smudging one another's cheeks with kisses, murmuring gossip, complaining about the crazy price of wheat, soups and stews, skewered meats, stacks of flatbread, honey cake and candy made with figs. They sprawled on the steps or sat near a neighbor's open door, stood under a blur of windows, someone playing a lyre, barefoot children reciting the Ode of Horace. Just like New York before the pandemic, before the many retreated and retired to their living rooms to watch the news on a loop, alone with a cat or dog, a furry stay against the nothing, nothing, nothing of loneliness, their dreams a passport to fear. I used to see the excavated people of Pompeii, frozen in time, caught curled in sleep or kneeling, a couple fucking, though there is one of a possible father propped in what looks like an easy chair, a mother bouncing a child on her lap, as if they decided in their final moments to be happy, to go into the afterlife covered in ash, buried alive by joy. So that's the Termopylaeum, and I thought I would read another poem from my new book, which is called Life on Earth. And this is a poem about my mother, and it's called Singer, which refers to a Singer's sewing machine, which only those of us of a certain age know what that looks like. But suffices to say that it's, we all had little factories when I was growing up in our living rooms, and the Singer sewing machine was that factory, and it had a metal plate treadle on the bottom, and it said Singer. It was embossed in metal. Singer. If I could go back to the living room window of my childhood house, look again through the pane, it would be a telescope lens through which I might see the first woman I ever met, my mother at her sewing machine, rewinding the bobbin, little spool with holes like an old movie reel our tiny lives spun inside of. I might see her long piano fingers touch the balance wheel, the throat plate, the presser bar, one bare foot working the treadle, her heel revealing only the first three letters in black latticed metal, sin. My mother was what some called a sinful woman, divorced, pregnant without a husband, a baby boy given up for adoption, remarried, another baby born of another man, a one-night stand while her husband was away at war. She drank too much, thought too much, laughed with her head thrown back, danced with anyone. Too pretty, too brainy, too tall, her black hair a snare that hooked men in. But right now, she's fully visible, stretching the fabric for a kitchen curtain, a child's dress, swatches she salvaged from the deep sale bins, using the selvage for a hem, thereby cutting her handiwork by half. The black oiled mechanism, banging out dress after dress, tablecloths and runners, nothing she couldn't cobble together from the waste of others. She was a very peculiar mother, and by now you can see why we loved her. She was a lit fuse in the rain. She turned from her work and set those same fingers on the piano keys and pulled music through the air. Making something from nothing was what she was good at. Love, children, pants and skirts to dress them in, a table covered with cherries on which the beautiful food appeared, roses from her front yard garden in an old cracked vase, her long arms around our shoulders saying, sit still, eat, try not to spill anything. And I'll end with this, which is the title poem of my new book, and it's called Life on Earth. The odds are we should never have been born, not one of us, not 1 in 400 trillion to be exact. Only one among the 250 million released in a flood of semen that glides like a glassine limousine filled with tadpoles of possible people, one of whom may or may not be you. A being made of water and blood, a creature with eyeballs and limbs that end in fists, a you with all your particular perfumes, the chords of your sinewy legs singing as they form, your organs humming and buzzing with new life, moonbeams lighting up your brain's gray coils, the exquisite hills of your face, the human toy your mother longs for, your father yearns to hold, the unmistakable you who will take your first breath, your first step, bang a copper pot with a wooden spoon, trace the lichen growing on a boulder you climb to see the wild expanse of a field, the one whose heart will yield to the yellow forsythia, named after William Forsythe. Not the American actor with piercing blue eyes, but the Scottish botanist who discovered the buttery bells on a highland hillside, blooming to beat the band, zigzagging down an unknown Scottish slope. And those are only a few of the things you will one day know, slowly chipping away at your ignorance and doubt. You who were born from ashes and will return to ash. When you think you might be through with this body and soul, look down at an anthill or up at the stars. Remember your gambler chances, the bounty of good luck you were born for. Thank you. And now we'll hear at last from Ellen Bass, whose most recent collection, Indigo, was published in 2020. Other poetry books include Like a Beggar, The Human Line, and Mules of Love. Her poems appear frequently in the New Yorker, American Poetry Review, and other journals. Among her awards are fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the NEA, and the California Arts Council, the Lambada Literary Award, and 3 Pushcart Prizes. She also co-edited the first major anthology of women's poetry, No More Masks. A chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, Bass founded poetry workshops at Salinas Valley State Prison and the Santa Cruz, California jails, and teaches at Pacific University.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's amazing to listen to all of you. And thank you, everybody at the Writers Studio. Thank you, Phil, and especially Bill. I just appreciate all that you do for poetry all the time. I'm going to read a poem from the Pushcart Anthology. During the pandemic, I listened to the July 26th, 1965 Juan Lapin recording of A Love Supreme. The first familiar know them anywhere notes bless me this savage morning. Coltrane's horn racing up and down every alley, in and out of veins, and over the faces of lakes and into the heart of stones. And when he repeats a love supreme again and again, it's as though if he says it enough, he can ease that mercy down into me, into the tiny ossicular chain, the chemical rush, the spark, and my brain getting it, if even just for this 32 minutes and 48 seconds. My daughter's been sick 7 weeks with the virus. Yesterday, she felt a little bored, she texted, and I grabbed that like a shopping cart. I loaded up with hope, make it prayer. When the day's portion of the Torah is recited, someone stands by to correct mistakes. The words must vibrate precisely in the air. So I open my door to the breath of his instrument that refuses nothing, lavishing the grass, gutters and trees, concrete, cars, the gopher pulling down the new lettuces. This generous sound that can mean anything, nothing, whatever you need. And isn't that God? Isn't that it? This shivering, this fall to my knees. Gods do walk among us, but humans are, after all, a broken promise. And yet, these humans seem to be trying to enter what? I can almost hear it, this old planet. Worms passing earth through their tissue, orchids, corn, mockingbirds throwing themselves into song like there's no tomorrow, which there may not be. Yet, still a mountain, still wind, and Coltrane still offering the same 4 notes, like a teacher who is infinitely patient. He's telling me it's worth it to be in a body. He's telling me I'm alive in a beach town in California, and my daughter in a high-rise in Vancouver, my girl lying feverish on the couch she's been lying on, 49 days and 49 nights, still alive. I thought I would also read an older poem, the first poem of mine that received a pushcart. And I can imagine how thrilled I was. It's called Gate C-22. At Gate C-22 in the Portland airport, a man in a broadband leather hat kissed a woman arriving from Orange County. They kissed and kissed and kissed. Long after the other passengers clicked the handles of their carry-ons and wheeled briskly toward short-term parking, the couple stood there, arms wrapped around each other, like he'd just staggered off the boat at Ellis Island, like she'd been released at last from ICU, snapped out of a coma, survived bone cancer, made it down from Annapurna in only the clothes she was wearing. Neither of them was young. His beard was gray. She carried a few extra pounds you could imagine her saying she had to lose. But they kissed lavish kisses, like the ocean in the early morning, the way it gathers and swells, sucking each rock under, swallowing it again and again. We were all watching. Passengers waiting for the delayed flight to San Jose, the stewardesses, the pilots, the aproned woman icing Cinnabons, the man selling sunglasses. We couldn't look away. We could taste the kisses crushed in our mouths. But the best part was his face. When he drew back and looked at her, his smile soft with wonder, almost as though he were a mother still open from giving birth. As your mother must have looked at you no matter what happened after, if she beat you or left you or you're lonely now. You once lay there, the vernix not yet wiped off, and someone gazed at you as if you were the first sunrise seen from the earth. The whole wing of the airport hushed, all of us trying to slip into that woman's middle-aged body, her plaid Bermuda shorts, sleeveless blouse, glasses, little gold hoop earrings, tilting our heads up. And this last poem I will read is called How to Apologize. Cook a large fish. Choose one with many bones. A skeleton you will need skill to expose. Maybe the flying silver carp that's invading the Great Lakes, tumbling the others into oblivion. If you don't live near a lake, you'll have to travel. Walking is best and shows you mean it, but you could take a train and let yourself be soothed by the rocking on the rails. It's permitted to receive solace for whatever you did or didn't do. Pitiful, beautiful, human. When my mother was in the hospital, my daughter and I had to clear out the home she wouldn't return to. Then she recovered and asked, incredulous, how could you have thrown out all my shoes? So you'll need a boat. You could rent or buy, but for the sake of repairing the world, build your own. Thin strips of Western red cedar are perfect, but don't cut a tree. There'll be a demolished barn or downed trunk if you venture further, and someone will have a mill, and someone will loan you tools. The perfume of sawdust and the curls that fall from your plane will sweeten the hours. Each night, we dream 36 billion dreams. In one night, we could dream back everything lost. So grill the pale flesh, unharness yourself from your weary stories. Then carry the oily, succulent fish to the one you hurt. There is much to fear as a creature caught in time, but this is safe. You need no defense. This is just another way to know you are alive.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you to all of our readers. We have been so fortunate to hear your work this evening, and it's not an overstatement to say we've really been just graced by your words, so thank you so much. Thank you to Brandon Taylor, Nancy Connors, Elaine Hsioh Chou, Bennett Sims, Sally Wen Mao, Dorianne Laux, and of course, Ellen Bass. Thank you so much. And thank you to Bill for publishing the Pushcart. We are so grateful that you do this every year. So thank you so much. And in the chat, for those who are interested, Francesca will be sharing links to the writers' work. So please go and support them, buy their books, buy the Pushcart anthology. The link's in the chat, so please check it out. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a wonderful evening, and we look forward to having you at our next reading. Thank you so much. Have a good night.